Welcome to Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective podcast, where we meet experts from all walks of life to learn their intrinsic motivation so that they can share it with the world. What do we have in store today? Stay tuned to find out more. Good morning, good evening, everybody out there in podcast land. This is another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza.
And I am David.
And before we get started, I do want to say my condolences and want to send my positive energies and thoughts to the Spade family. And for anyone out there that feels that they don't have anyone to speak with and they feel like they need to talk to somebody or are in crisis, I wanted to give this National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. Yes, near and dear to my heart, so I wanted to send salutations and energies and thoughts out to the Spade family. So, without further ado, I am really excited about our guest today. She is the president of the Black Nonbelievers, and this is the first I've ever heard of this group. She's here in Atlanta, and I'm really excited to speak with her because it reminds me of the attraction when I first came to Atlanta. I went to Clark, Atlanta, and the prospect of walking on campus and meeting brothers and sisters that were Greek, or meeting Christians or Muslims or 5%ers or Ansars, Egyptologists and all that. We all coexisted. It was fantastic. I met Satanists on campus. You were like, Black Satanists? How does that work? And I never really ran into, quote-unquote, Black Nonbelievers. And we actually have the president, Mandisa Thomas, who's going to tell us all about the Black Nonbelievers movement. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Good evening and good morning, everyone.
Yes, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Yes, thanks for making the time to make our podcast today. Now, I do know, David and I could probably attest to this, that if you live here longer than 6 months, you are seen as being an Atlantan. Do you fall into that category, or are you true blue born and raised?
Well, it's interesting. I have been in the Atlanta area with my family now for over 20 years, but I was born and raised in New York City, and I moved down here when I was 21. So I was born and raised in New York, but I have lived half my life here in Atlanta. So I guess you could say I'm from both.
Okay. All right. I love it. You and I have a little bit in common about the tri-state, and so we'll go into that I was looking through your website, but before getting into the whole tri-state area stuff, I wanted to get a little bit of your background. If you could tell us, is this what you do full time? Is this what was the origin? What was the impetus of starting this? And what is the current state of the union, if you will, of what you guys are looking at?
Okay, well, let me try to wrap this up in about 2 minutes or so. Yes, we atheists do have a sense of humor, just a FYI. So I have, my background is that it's interesting that you mentioned like 5%ers, because my background growing up, I wasn't formally raised religious. I was raised in the, with the Black conscious community, what some would call woke now. So I grew up learning about, Malcolm X and other notable, figures in Black history. And so my background was very, very militant, outspoken, very power to the people, very much like Black power and Black pride. And one of the things I remember learning early on was how Christianity in particular was imposed, particularly during slavery in the United States of African captives. And so, the imposing, particularly of the white Jesus and the white God, I quickly made the correlation between that and other issues of colorism within the Black community. And so just kind of keeping that with me, carrying that into my adulthood, I kind of saw myself as being spiritual after a while, but not really religious. And so as I, as my family grew and I thought about my philosophical perspective, I eventually, in encountering other people as well as reflecting on my perspective and my upbringing, and I eventually, I would say, re-identified as atheist. And one of the things I've noticed was that, there were very few of us, like on the ground and in person. I had met others online, but after attending an atheist meetup in person, I said, I figured that there were more of us out here, but there just wasn't enough of us that maybe knew how to find each other. And so that's when Black Nonbelievers was formed as Black Nonbelievers of Atlanta. And I have to give a shout out to JP, who you and I know, Hamza. He was one of our founding members of the group, and has been involved with us ever since. And at the time that we started the organization, I was working full-time at the CDC. I just recently resigned from that job in order to take on Black Nonbelievers full-time, because I have been involved with the atheist/secular movement for the past 7 years, in addition to Black Nonbelievers. And so as a result of our organization, we have been able to sufficiently connect with other Black atheists, other Blacks who are nonbelievers. And we say nonbelievers because our point of view and our perspective goes beyond religion and the God concept. But we definitely strongly encourage the atheist identity and for other Blacks to be open with the atheist identity. We started in Atlanta in 2011, and now we're up to 11 affiliate groups nationwide, most recently in the Cincinnati area. And so I have taken on activism within the atheist and secular movement full-time, particularly to help grow Black Nonbelievers full-time. And I'm fortunate that my involvement has led to an increase in a demand for me to be more full-time in this movement, which I'm very grateful for. And so that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
It really it resonates with me in the sense that when David and I were kicking around the idea of doing a podcast, and we were like, well, what do we talk about? Do we talk about sports or, and not put words in your mouth, David, but, he has a psychic background, I have a psychic background. And what we were finding is that, even though we were looking for enlightenment and moving forward and being our best selves, there weren't a lot of people that looked like us. And so we wanted to talk about the intrinsic motivation, which I think is paramount for anyone to reach their best self, but we wanted to add the homies perspective. And so I was thinking about I was watching a recent video interview of Lord Jamar from Brand Nubian.
And
so he was talking about, how he became a 5%er, but he was mentioning that his mother was a Jehovah's Witness, and in New Rochelle was, one area of the city, and then I forget the neighboring city, but let's just say they were more well-to-do, and so they kind of shared the temple, and they were like, well, those that live in New Rochelle, you go in the morning, we'll go in the afternoon. And one day we missed the morning one, and they were like, well, let's go to the afternoon because we missed the morning one. Well, the other group was there, and no one looked like them, and they were looking at them like, what the hell are you doing here? Right? And they're like, but we're Jehovah's Witness. And they were like, yeah, but you're not our Jehovah's Witness. And so I got to bring that story up because I was wondering, in your past, in your travels, and you were going to atheist meetups, did you find something similar in that you felt you needed to start Black Nonbelievers? Did you feel a demarcation line in the sand?
Yes, and I actually didn't even start off wanting to put together particularly a Black organization. When I re-identified as an atheist the first time I was 14 years old, but then again I came back to that. I saw a post on Facebook about a Black atheist meeting, and so in trying to find more information about it, I came across meetup.com and came across this particular meetup that I attended. Now, I had talked to other Black atheists online who had expressed that they experienced challenges with meetups and conferences and conventions and larger events in person because more often than not, they were the only Black person there or very few, and then the encounters with the white atheists were awkward to put it mild. And so I thought, well, maybe that won't be my experience. Hopefully with the atheist identity and trying to meet more of us, then that won't be much of an issue. But sure enough, when I got to that meetup, I encountered almost exactly what they experienced. And I wouldn't say that all of it is intentional, but the problem is that there can be a disconnect with what white atheists experience and between atheists of color, whether they are Black, Latin, or of Latin origin, or other people of color, and even other women. Those experiences can be quite different, and there is often a misunderstanding and even some condescension when it comes to our experiences, and they seem to be very oblivious to a predominantly white group. And again, that's not saying that it's intentional, but the thought process and the vision was to help bring out more Black atheists, because again, in trying to balance out that predominantly white represented atheist community and then a still largely religious Black community, there had to be that bridge, and that was us. That yes, we had to say, we had to create an organization of Black Nonbelievers because people needed to find more of us on the ground. And yes, and I hope I answered that question because I feel myself kind of like going off. But yes, there was specifically a need to create an organization so that other Black atheists could find and those who could more readily identify with what we go through, and who could more readily understand the issues that we face, particularly as it pertains to our community.
Mm. Now, with again, I'll speak for myself and not David, but with what I found in my experience as far as clusters, if you will, like with the psychic realm or those interested in metaphysical conversation, that there are certain pockets in the United States where there's more of an openness. Like there may be Atlanta, then there may be Colorado or California or New York City. And in your travels, and as you've grown to over 11 affiliate groups and you're traveling around the country, are you seeing similar pockets with regards to atheism?
You mean as far as finding more people of color or more Black folks? Yes. I can say that, again, there's a large contingency. There are a large number of atheists online, particularly Black atheists. But yes, I do find that when I do travel, and as over the years, even within these past 7 years, the number of Black atheists that attend larger events has increased, and that is, I'm proud to say that is because of our organization's existence, and more people finding us as a result. I have found that over the years with certain larger events, there are more of, I would say, for example, and there are some who hadn't heard of us, or they didn't know that there was an organized effort, particularly to bring Black atheists together, which is a good thing. Like 2 years ago at the Second Reason rally in Washington, D.C., there were people who just came out because they knew that the atheist community in particular has grown exponentially within the past few years. And so when we were at the Reason rally, there were other Black folks there who were like, wow, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that there is an organization specifically to help bring out more Black atheists? I didn't know that. And so that is a really, really good thing. Overall, I think it is largely due to our presence as an organization, but also to the increase of the increasing presence of organizations, period, like atheist and secular organizations, period, is helping bring out more of us.
Interesting. So, man, so let me ask you this. Let me ask you this real quick. So, would you say that the majority, the number of people that become a part of Black Nonbelievers or associated with it, are they coming from other different other religions and they just got disillusioned with it and they're just looking for something else, or would you say that they've never really been associated with any kind of religion and somehow they end up finding you or other groups?
It's an interesting mix. The majority of our members come from Christianity. They were former Christians. Some of them have bounced around, if you will. They bounced around from Christianity to Islam to maybe Buddhism, or like you mentioned, like metaphysical or the spiritual mindset. Then they went to like agnosticism to atheism. There is a difference there. But most of our members, we do have some former Muslims as well, who jump straight from, Islam to atheism. But the majority of our members are former Christians who have, transitioned out of religion into atheism. And that can be a very, very isolating experience. Because I wouldn't say that all atheists are introverts, but there are a lot of us who tend to be, and that's difficult to navigate that social part. And for many, it was, some were looking for just ways to connect with others. Some were just looking for ways to deal with it. And most of their family members and friends were just like, well, this is a phase, you'll come back, or you just need to pray on it, or something like that. And I think there are some others who, once they came to their atheism and they started looking for other atheists, that's how they found our organization.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that, like you said, a lot of them come from the background of Christianity? Would you say it's a fairly common, are they kind of all saying the same thing as far as why, or is it kind of from A to Z, the reasons why they decided to leave or get disillusioned with it?
It's a wide variety, but the majority of them, and I've come across some members who said that they were forced to go to church, but that the teachings just didn't make any sense to them. Many actually started reading the Bible, and they started reading it objectively as if it was a book they were actually like trying to read, as they took their, they took their, I guess, belief out of it. So many of them actually started, and you'll find many atheists who say this, that, they became atheists by reading the Bible. And so that was part of it. Many atheists, there's a misconception that, a lot of atheists are just angry at God, and that's the reason why they left religion. Many of our members and many other atheists have actually, they took a very comprehensive approach to their non-belief. They actually were trying to find more meaning in the religion that they were in. And once they started doing that, they came out with more questions than answers. Mm-hmm. And so really it was a more educated approach. And then they started reading other books outside of the Bible. I know many people credit The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins as a book that with their transition journey. Many started reading other accounts of those who were formerly in religions who left. And so it really, there is some emotion involved in that. Some of the journeys are very painful because some people feel like they're lied to. So, but most atheists and most of our men really did take that pragmatic, trying to find more of a meaning within their religion and started reading more, and then they eventually transitioned.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah, that was a good point, David, because you're right, Mandy. So I think the perception is anger. There was something that happened beyond their control, or there was just something that they couldn't answer, and they're just like, you know what, I don't buy this anymore. And so before I go into my question, you did mention The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. Were there other literary or other books that you could point to for people listening to the podcast to check out?
Absolutely. There are a lot of atheists. They point to God Is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens. I try to recommend some other Black authors as well. There's Jeremiah Kamara, who's also based in Atlanta, and he was actually one of my inspirations in starting on my transition and path to openly identifying as an atheist and starting the organization. He produced a documentary called Contradiction, and he's also the author of the books Holy Lockdown, Does the Black Church Limit Progress, and The New Doubting Thomas, The Bible, Black Folks, and Blind Belief. And also there is another book by Candace Gorham called The Ebony Exodus Project, Why Some Black Women Are Walking Out on Religion, and maybe you should too. But certainly those books also by, Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, God Is Not Great. And I think the subtitle is How Religion Poisons Everything. So there are a number of books now that people can reference as far as if they have their doubts and questions, and also if they just want to read up on others who were deeply, devoutly religious, but then they came out of that religion and now they're atheists. But yes, those are four in particular that I would recommend anyone who is either on this journey or who would just like to who would just like those as references if they'd like to pick them up.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. So problem. My first, I have two questions. One, I'm going to hold until your answer to the first one. So the first, Jeremiah. What's Jeremiah's last name?
His last name is Kamara, Camara.
Okay, thank you. And so one of his books was it Lockdown or The Contradiction? What was the name of that book?
Contradiction is the documentary. The first book he wrote was called Holy Lockdown.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Mm-hmm. And so he was talking about were we being held hostage in the church?
Pretty much, yes.
And that's what I wanted to address, or at least ask you. So I'm just thinking more so from a human nature standpoint, because let me preface it by saying a human nature standpoint, because when we look at the Black American experience, we usually reference slavery and then what came out of slavery, right? And then we were so we had the polarity of the oppressor and the oppressed, and then when you had the 1900s, and just thinking just from a very simple example, when people were given certain powers or perceived power. So let's just say like some of your Greek organizations or some of these other organizations where they wound up carrying some of the same traits that maybe their oppressors had on their own people, with, physical and mental abuse and what have you. And so I'm saying it from a human standpoint because in recent years on the internet, the internet kind of connects communities. And so from an internet standpoint, a lot of groups have been talking about the Book of Thomas or the Gospel of Thomas. Are you familiar with that?
Not really. I will say that I am not really a Bible scholar, but I do know the premise behind Thomas, that he was the doubter. Is that correct?
It's more so from what I was talking about with the human standpoint, that the Gospel of Thomas was actually edited out of the Bible. And,
was it? Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so, afterwards I could send you some links and all. But so what happened was, I want to say 400 years after, quote unquote, Jesus' death, people were threatened with being burned at the stake or hanged. Like it was, you were punished by death if you were caught with the Book of Thomas. And so, from a human standpoint, I've always understood it as it could be a religion, it could be politics, or used to control people. And if you give them too much of that knowledge, now we're questioning everything and we no longer control them. And so it's interesting that, with atheism and some of the other things with the Black experience, we're always open to looking at all these different things. And some of it is because we haven't gotten all the information. Some of the preachers during slavery and after slavery were hanged themselves if they were given more of the Bible than what they were supposed to, as they were told to. They kind of alluded a little bit in the Nat Turner movie last year. They were like, well, no, just tell them anything as long as they're going to keep working. But when he would quote other parts of the Bible, they're like, no, you're riling the people up. So it's just really interesting how, from a religious standpoint, it is from a grand scale, and it sounds like a lot of people that come into your group and some of the others, they're disillusioned, but they're disillusioned because they're only getting half of the story. I wanted to get your take on that.
Well, what's interesting is that I think when you're involved in any religion or any thought that puts dogma over evidence or something that you're just supposed to take at face value, you're not really supposed to look any deeper into it than what is told to you. That tends to be the case. And that is most forms of indoctrination. Certainly our parents have done it to us. In many cases, our churches have done this to us. And sometimes I would even say on the public education or even education standpoint as well. I would say, though, that what you mentioned, people and systems that allow certain folks to rise to power. And you are absolutely right that during slavery, it was pretty much illegal. It was illegal to teach slaves to read or write. The only book that was allowed to be interpreted was the Bible, and certain parts of the Bible, of course. And also within the Black community, we must remember that the church was pretty much one of the few places that Blacks could rise to prominence and power. And so that traditionally has kind of held certain parts of the community together. Now, I will say that there is a lot of information. Yes, I think many of us only get part of the information, but there's a lot of it that's out there that we don't think about. Like, for example, the founder of Black History Month, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who wrote The Miseducation of the Negro, founded Negro History Week, which was the foundation for Black History Month. He challenged religion in that very same book, The Miseducation of the Negro. He challenged the effectiveness of the church within the Black community. And there were other notables, like I mentioned earlier, in Black history that were great contributors, like to the Harlem Renaissance, for example, who were very, very critical of the institution of the church, particularly within the Black community. And so, yes, when you have these systems in place and especially this church, which has a huge influence as far as who is perceived as, who is very important within our community. This information tends to be obscured, which is unfortunate because it really does, it diminishes the diversity of the community in our community that has always been there. There have always been Black atheists. There have always been Black humanists, free thinkers, doubters of religion, etc. This isn't anything new. But unfortunately, with the majority of folks from our community that still hold religion and the church in high regard, this information definitely does get lost, which is unfortunate. But also it is up to us, not even I would say atheists, but it is up to the entire community to be honest about that and reshape and redefine that narrative.
Good point. I know that one statement that I really like is the more, what is it? Oh, man. The realer, I forgot the thing. No, it's something like the more, oh, man, the realer, some things are the way they seem, and some things are not the way they seem. I'm totally butchering it. But with that being said, it's kind of like when I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast about being happy of coming to Clark Atlanta and just seeing all these different walks of life. It was great even just from a Black American standpoint, because on some levels for people that don't travel, you think, okay, this is my corner of the world and everybody's the same. And then,
right.
You come to Atlanta and and you're just like, what? And you're like, you see Satanists and everybody's in these ciphers and circles and, talking about how they feel and what have you. And then, everybody leaves and they peacefully coexist. But what I found was, like, especially with the Satanists, they were more of, I would say they were more Christian or Catholic than the actual general population that were going to church, because they were questioning so much. It was like, wow, those are the real people. And so on some level, and we haven't talked about like tenets or anything with atheism, but I'm thinking on some level, right, that there's some similarities just because you questioned, and that's what the Book of Thomas, Gospel of Thomas always talks about also, as far as looking within instead of without for your answers. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking with atheism and humanism, as you were mentioning it being around, I remember it from as a hip-hop head, KRS was saying that he's a humanist since like the early 90s, but there was never the cohesion that I really saw in seeing your site, like just forming a 501c3 nonprofit and just building it up from a corporate standpoint instead of, a faction that kind of goes away in 5 or 10 years.
Right. And one of the things that it was interesting because I'm not sure if we actually set it out to be this. I know I can say for myself that I knew there was a need for this organization and this group to be formed. I was kind of looking long term, but then I wasn't, because I wasn't sure how far it was going to go. But in building that, in building this organization and hearing from the people, hearing from those who expressed that relief that we were here, and also talking and also having people reach out to us, wanting to hear our stories, wanting to see us, and wanting to understand the position. It became quite clear that we needed to be more long-term. And I'm more of a long-term type of person. I do like to try to establish foundations, because this is something that the Black community in particular and the atheist and secular community does need. They need to see and they need to hear the voices of the atheists and the nonbelievers out there. And I'm not sure if there were any other Black folks who actually ever thought of it. I mean, there were some other organizations out there, but because I'm grateful for my background in, putting events together. I do have like a customer service and hospitality background, And so that helps with my ability to relate to people, because that's what we are at the end of the day. We are people. We are human beings. We do, we do connect. We do talk. We are normal. There's nothing really, and I guess in the grand scheme of what's considered normal, if you will, because I tend to try to think outside of that normal box. But as far as individuals and just as just as people, we do exist, and there's a need for us to be more understanding and to try to connect outside of, like you said, those spaces of where we were in our corners of the world, that we don't exist in a vacuum, and that there are probably more of us, again, out there than we realize, and that it's okay for us to come to that understanding. And if someone actually comes across us, because it is not my mission to try to make everyone in the world atheist. What is important to me is that people they are their authentic selves, that they are able to have these questions and put these thoughts out there without being demonized, without being ostracized, and they're able to have an objective conversation, particularly with other folks in their community. And so I just think that in looking back at it, this is probably something that is more groundbreaking, because there are still very few Black folks that we know of in the public eye who will ever say that they are atheist. And so hopefully this is something that will change in the near future. And hopefully with our existence, with us establishing, this nonprofit 501c3 organization, because when people think of, organizing, they think only of like religion, and fellowship is not a religious word. The ability to get together and organize doesn't belong to religious organizations. There have always been secular organizations, and they will continue to be secular organizations. And so hopefully this is a good starting point for what will come in the future.
Thought David was chomping at the bit there. Go ahead.
So would you say, Mandisa, is it a misconception that atheists are always out there trying to turn everyone into atheists?
Yes. I would. There are many atheists who I will even say that, they do kind of go a little overboard with challenging people on like the Bible and religion and such. Some atheists seem to go looking for a fight. Yeah. However, that isn't any different from many of your believers who invite you to go to church with them on Sundays. Yeah. And I've actually had more people come up to me and ask me, was I born again? That just comes out of nowhere. Yeah. Or, have you taken the Lord into your heart? That there is part of that is a pushback from what they've received from all these, from all these years, from the religious folks trying to convert them and bring them into, their way of thinking. There are some who will openly point out, the inconsistencies in the Bible and such. And so, my thing is, hey, you know what, you can believe what you want, even if I don't agree with it, even if I think a lot of it is very, very flawed. As long as you have a good understanding of what you believe, which many believers do not. But as a person, I'm not going to infringe upon your right to believe in it as long as you are not infringing on my non-belief. Or you don't look at me like I have two heads because I say I don't believe. Yeah. But yes, it is a misconception that many atheists are just out trying to just deconvert people and just trying to turn people away from the Lord. But I just, my thing is, hey, once you start thinking for yourself, that should be a natural process. I always encourage people not what to think, but basically how to think. There are many believers who think that's a bad thing, but that also goes into another aspect of belief, which is fear. Many people are scared to not believe, or they're scared to perhaps look at someone who is an atheist because maybe they just automatically think that they'll be, turned away or what have you. I can't say that that's always the case, but, many of us are just chill. We have families, we work, we do, but we just don't want our rights infringed upon. And that's something that I definitely will be taking more of a strong stance on, considering I'm a huge advocate of church and state separation. And right now, especially with this administration, there's a lot of lines being blurred there, and that fight does need to continue. So if that is, I guess if that is a misconception, I wouldn't even say it is, but it doesn't represent all atheists out there. Many of us just want to live our lives and not be bothered. But there are a certain number of atheists who will either come out the gate and just, openly challenge, but also there are a lot of organized efforts of folks that are looking for like church and state separation violations, rightfully so.
When I'm looking at this from again, since we're talking about religion, I'm thinking of Christmas when you're a little kid and you get that bike and now you want everyone to ride the bike, right? So when I'm looking at the Black American timeline, right, when you ask, the question people are asking, are you saved? That's something typically that happens more so here in the South. And from a timeline standpoint, when people were making the migration from the South in the 1900s because there wasn't any employment here to the North, you had a lot of people that were, if I can still use this analogy, riding that new bike. And so because they had the new bike, of course you want to question and you want to test and see, is this valid or what can I live with it? So from in the early 1900s, you had Marcus Garveyism, you had Noble Drew Ali and the Moors, you had Nation of Islam and all that. And so in 2018, you have awards now where all of these groups coexist and they, like you said, they're kind of living amongst themselves and they're no longer on the corner so much. You still have a little bit of it. I think that's just part of the process. But you don't have it as much where people are trying to yell over each other about why their belief is right or wrong. So I do see maturation. I just didn't see it, any inkling or talks from an atheist standpoint. It was more of a humanist standpoint. And at the beginning of the podcast, it was more, and it was probably just me not having the awareness. It was more of a race thing. I just didn't see Black atheists there. It was just, so this is very enlightening to me.
Yeah, if we're going back to that time period of, Marcus Garvey and, like you said, Noble Drew Ali and even W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a free thinker, I would point you to Hubert Henry Harrison, who was an open atheist. And he openly challenged religion during the Harlem Renaissance era. He was very, I think he, and also what's very interesting is the level of, dissent among certain Black leaders during that time period that kind of mirrored today, that intellectual, critique and of each other, which is, I think, another aspect that is lost on us. I don't ever like to put us in this box that we all think alike. We don't. There have always been varied perspectives in the Black community. There has always been a dissent and disagreements on how to handle issues in our community, in particular, and particularly pertaining to race and the injustice. So I do like to kind of point to that. There were some, and I would say, Harrison in particular, if you'd like to find more information on him. Also, I think at that time, even today, and this is something that I think is a bit unfortunate in our community, even like Lorraine Hansberry, she wrote A Raisin in the Sun, which was adapted into, a movie eventually. There was that piece with the daughter, and I cannot remember her name, but the daughter was an atheist. She had denounced God, and, the mama slapped her. So, there was this piece in literature, and historically, where there have always been those pockets where blacks have expressed their, dissent, particularly with religion and the God concept. Unfortunately, as I said before, it's been obscured by other schools of thought, most of them which were still rooted in some sort of religious belief, because Marcus Garvey, for example, who is the father of, Black nationalism as we know it today, I think he was still religious. And so even though he had a very, very powerful voice and platform when it came to Black liberation, that liberation theology was still often rooted in religious thought. Even if there was a critique of religion, it's still kind of, there was this thing that we kind of deal with this, when we talk about atheism in our community, is that, well, that's a white thing. That's something that white people do, that somehow Black folks can't be atheists. We can't possibly be without God because God has led us through, whether you believe in Christianity or you have to believe in something. And so that's also another notion of misconception that we challenge.
Good point. One thing that I like about 2018, and again, from a homie's perspective, so for hip hop, right? So over the past, I want to say it happened like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and prior to that, everyone was at, there's a lot of collaborations in hip hop now, right? Where I can live anywhere and I'll collaborate with someone anywhere, right? And during the time where I kind of came up in the late 80s, early 90s, people were at, in 2018 asking, man, what if Rakim pulled Nas under his wing and they collabed and built and got together and did stuff, right? I mean, the world would have been unstoppable. And so the last couple of weeks, it was beautiful to see J. Cole reach out to Lil Pump, because, you were having some of that old versus young energy where, this person doesn't know this or this person doesn't know that. And it was more of like, look, I'm not against you. This is your belief right now, and I'm just trying to steer you in the right direction. I thought that was beautiful, and that before those would have been fighting words. Somebody would have ended up transitioning, and they wouldn't be on the earth anymore. And so people are getting together. The other beautiful thing, and this is more of a question to you, is June 1st. June 1st was the anniversary of the Wall Street massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so, Jay Morrison had gotten together and they built this Tulsa real estate fund where they're going around and they're buying properties around the country and what have you. And it was just really great to see all the different groups, like I mentioned before, the New Wabians and just everybody under the sun. It didn't matter what your belief was. They kind of got together, pulled their resources, and they're trying to raise $50 million, and today's only the 6th, and I think they've already reached the $10 million mark. And so before it was just, this is our little cluster, and this is what we're going to build. And I think people are putting aside their differences. And I was wondering if the Black Nonbelievers have a stake in the claim. Did you know anything about the Tulsa, Oklahoma Fund? And how are you guys dealing with the political and the economic climate that we're currently in?
Well, what's interesting is that I knew about, of course I know about the, the Tulsa, massacre back then. I didn't know that there was a new initiative to help rebuild it. Many of our members are involved in other movements. Many of our members are members of like the Black Lives Matter initiative and other economic initiatives. The problem that they face, though, is that if they openly identify as atheists, they risk disassociation immediately. And many of them are in the closet, so to speak. And as much as we would love to be part of, we encourage our members to and myself, I am, I encourage the voting process because I do vote. I also encourage empowerment, especially within the Black community. I do find it a turnoff, though, when the go-to is, well, let's pray about it, or when people start putting their religion into it, it does become a turnoff. It becomes less about the movement building and more about your ideology, which can be challenging to deal with. And because at this time, because many people are still, looking for that space, to be comfortable with their non-belief without being attacked or accosted, that is where the majority of our, focus is, trying to help our fellow Black atheists and atheists in general find that space to be personal, in their personal lives, and so that hopefully we can continue to build collectively and also be out, because again, I will not hide my atheism for anyone. I mean, there's always a time and a place for that. But if I have to hide it, or if I have to obscure it for fear of being just turned off or turned away immediately, it does prevent and it prohibits, the collective focus, because now you have to worry about that. You have to worry about whether the Nawabians are going to, either come at you or the Christians are going to come at you in some way, and that they feel like we can't work together because we're atheists or we don't believe. And that is a harsh reality for many of us. So I encourage, and also let me just say too that it's important for us to realize, and again, as I mentioned before about, Black, disagreements amongst our leaders, I think it's okay for us to not agree on everything. It's when those disagreements get to the point where it stops initiatives that it becomes an issue. Now, hopefully in the near future, I mean, we've contributed to a number of initiatives. I know last year we contributed to the Black Women's March that was in D.C., and we did so openly as an organization. But we still deal with that, with that whole, we'll be responsible about Black non. It goes very quickly, when the name Black Nonbelievers comes up. And so once we're able to get past that hurdle, where people can understand, hey, this is a legitimate and important part of our community, then we'll be able to contribute more and more openly to other initiatives such as this. Now, if there is someone that that we know of that is willing to work with us and collaborate with us, who will not have an issue with us being atheists and non-believers, then I'm all for it. But until then, our primary focus really is to help build that support and continue to increase the visibility of Black atheists as a collective, because again, we all are involved in other initiatives, and probably the ones you mentioned, I need to ask our members about that too. But as long as they're still in the closet, if you will, and will have to, deal with other Black folks who are highly religious and who have a problem with their atheism, then that's where our focus lies, is in helping people deal with that and having that space to sometimes vent and cry about that, because that is a reality for many of us.
Yeah, I think it was beautiful just to see, it's only 6 days in, and I'm sure they'll reach their 50 million mark. It was more of, we don't care what your race, religion is, right? That separated us for so many over the past 100 years because of these differences, and the bigger picture is more of building an economic base. So I think what's going to happen is, people are going to see, just like anything, it's, when a football team wins the Super Bowl, it's harder for them to get back the next year because everybody looks at what they did that was successful and then builds on that. So hopefully in the future we'll have multiple ones. I'm just more so excited because I remember, God Bless the Dead, it made me think of Prince. And it was well known, or in hushed voices in the Atlanta University Center, that he and others were donating money to the school, and they weren't publicly like, hey, you know what, I just gave them a couple of $1 million. It was just, we're looking at the bigger picture, the HBCUs, the kids, and so I think, as I would use the football analogy, it makes me think of the Koch brothers. Everybody looks at them as being evil, but one thing that they do is they do hedge their bets, but they also put money in a lot of different camps. So it's kind of like, yeah, this is what we believe, but this is what's going on over there, and we're going to leverage that too. So, it's really interesting how the 2018 conversation's morphing, and it'll be fun to watch to see, where the Black Nonbelievers, what their stake is and everything, in all walks of life now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Just to watch you guys grow. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. And thank you once again for having me on the show to have this conversation. I hope to have more of them in the future.
Yes, do you have any other questions, David?
One question real quick question I was going to ask. Have you ever had anyone that, has left, whether it was Christianity, Islam, whatever, have come to your group and then been a part of your the Black Nonbelievers, and then for whatever reason went back, decided that wasn't working, and decided to go back to religion? Or
what's very interesting, I've seen a number of people, not necessarily within our organization, they may have been in our online forums, who have, there was one woman in particular who she went by the name Minister Freethinker, which I'm always interestingly curious about people who, put monikers to themselves. I remember seeing her around. She used to do videos, but then she contacted us one day saying that, she found the Lord and we need to get back to the Lord. And I was like, wait a minute. That was pretty interesting. What tends to happen is that there are a lot of people who become emotionally jaded by religion, and then they're expecting that the atheist and secular community is going to be vastly different. In some ways it is, in some way it isn't, where people just like everyone else. And unfortunately, people tend to take a lot of baggage with them from their indoctrination. And I just say indoctrination, not necessarily religious indoctrination, because it goes further than that. There are some who, they take whatever an unresolved baggage that they have, and they think that things are going to be drastically different in this other community. And so when they find that it doesn't magically happen, if you will, if it doesn't seem like it's divine intervention, then they may go back. They may think, well, I may go back, to the Lord or what have you, because there were other aspects that they may not have sufficiently dealt with, as a result. And, it happens. Most of our members have come out of religion to non-belief and atheism, and they've never gone back. Does that mean that their minds are solely, set on that? No, because we encourage people to be open to changing their minds to no matter what it is, but it should be on an evidence and verification base, that when new information comes along, that you take things into consideration, and you have to and be objective. Many of us are still, as a community, we are still overcoming from those, the racial institutionalized racism, institutionalized injustice. So there's a lot of baggage there. And also that religious baggage is still there too. So it's been very rare. It's happened. I've seen it, but most of our members are here to stay.
Okay.
And Mandisa, before you give your social media sites and websites so they can contact you, one cool thing take away from your site is that religion, or when we get together, it doesn't have to always be serious. So please take the time in the moment, this present moment, to talk about and plug your DR event in November.
Oh, yes. We are cruising again for the second year in a row. One of Black Nonbelievers as an organization, we do encourage that fellowship and that social aspect. We are hosting our second annual convention at Sea, which is a 5-night, 6-day cruise out of Miami. We'll be going to Turks and Caicos and the Dominican Republic. And part of this is that many of our members have devoted their lives to their churches or their religious institutions, and they've never sufficiently traveled. Many people have never been on a cruise before. There's something about traveling and seeing different parts of the world and with a group of like-minded individuals that is life-changing. And so we encourage people to enjoy their lives as well. Not every part of our lives has to be devoted to a struggle or to a cause, even though this is cause-based. Or even if you just want to come and have a good time on a cruise, we'll be aboard the Carnival Sensation in November right after Thanksgiving. The prices are still very reasonable. You can still sign up. You can go. It's on the home page of our website. You'll want to join us for this one. It's the Black Nonbelievers Convention at Sea, and we'll be cruising. We're going to be having a good time. Jeremiah Kamar is one of our speakers, and so you'll definitely want to join us for that.
And what's the website where they can find out more information about that and get in touch with you with any other questions?
Our website is blacknonbelievers.org. It reroutes to blacknonbelievers.wordpress.com. You can also find us on Twitter. Our handle is BNonbelievers. The B and the N are capitalized. We are also on Meetup at meetups.com/blacknonbelievers. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/blacknonbelievers. And so pretty much almost anywhere on the internet is where you can find us, but definitely on the website for our organization.
Awesome. Well, you have just been tuned to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza.
And I am David.
And Mandisa, it was a pleasure speaking with you, learning more about the Black Nonbelievers. Let's stay in touch.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you guys once again for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you. Okay.
Listen to Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective on Radio Public. It's a free, easy-to-use app that helps listeners like you find and support shows like ours. When you listen to our show on Radio Public, we receive direct financial support every time you hear an episode. Experience our show in Radio Public today by listening to the show link in our episode notes, and thank you for listening. Thanks again for checking out another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective podcast. Please check us out on our website at intrinsicmotivation.life, where you can click on the Speak Pipe button and leave any suggestions for future podcasts that you'd like us to cover. Also, check us out on our social media sites. We have a YouTube channel, Facebook page, iTunes podcast, in addition to Stitcher and Google Play, all under Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. Check you out next time. Have a great day.